There is a 12-year-old boy in Holmes County, Ohio, who can build a root cellar. Not help build one. Build one. He knows where to site it, how deep to dig, how to dry stack the stone walls, how to frame the ceiling, how to install the ventilation, and how to seal the entrance against rodent entry. He learned it by watching his father build one when he was 6, by helping carry stone when he was 8, by mixing mortar when he was 10, and by building the small one behind the family's summer kitchen under his father's supervision. He did not learn it from a curriculum. He did not learn it from a YouTube video. He learned it from the same mechanism that every piece of knowledge was transmitted across every generation of every Amish community. He learned it by doing it alongside someone who already knew how. This video is about education, not in the sense of schooling and testing, but in the sense used for the first 10,000 years. The direct transmission of practical knowledge from someone who can do something to someone who wants to be able to do it. The Amish model produces 14-year-olds who can manage fermentation and 16-year-olds who can install solar water heating systems, and 18-year-olds who can establish a beehive from a captured swarm and maintain it without any assistance. This happens because the model treats every activity as a teaching opportunity and every child as an apprentice in household production. The average American household spends approximately $13,000 per year on K-12 education through the tax system. Over 18 years, that's $270,000 to $324,000 per child. Yet the knowledge that child emerges with has a remarkable gap in it. The gap is practical knowledge. How to produce food, build and repair structures, and manage the biological systems that support health. The knowledge of how to live on a planet without requiring an industrial infrastructure to manage every physical need on your behalf. This is not a critique of academic education. Mathematics, science, and history are genuine goods transmitted with varying effectiveness. The critique is of what is absent. The practical knowledge the Amish 12-year-old possesses is complementary to academic knowledge. A child who can build a root cellar and also reads fluently is more complete than a child who can only do the latter. The American school system, operating in the shadow of the industrial model, produces primarily the latter. Let me describe how the Amish education system works in practice. This description reveals principles of knowledge transmission that apply to any household. The Amish child begins learning by presence. Before they can walk, they are carried to where the work is happening. The toddler in the kitchen watching the fermentation crocks being checked. The 4-year-old walking alongside the parent during the morning animal chores. At this stage, learning is purely observational. The child is absorbing the rhythm, the smell, the sound, and the texture of the work. This observational phase is not recognized as education in the formal sense, but its educational value is fundamental. The knowledge is in their body before it is in their hands. They already know what fermentation looks and feels like before they manage it alone. Procedural memory, the system that stores how to do things, is encoded primarily through repeated physical performance of the task. The school system is designed to transmit declarative knowledge efficiently. It is a poor format for procedural knowledge transmission. You cannot learn to ride a bicycle from a lecture about bicycles, any more than you can learn to ferment from a lecture about fermentation chemistry. The Amish household is a procedural learning environment by default. Every activity is an opportunity for memory encoding through direct physical participation. The child who stirs the crock, who smells the sour change and tastes the brine, is encoding knowledge directly into the brain's most durable systems. This is general cognitive neuroscience. Jean Piaget documented the role of physical interaction with materials in cognitive development throughout the 20th century. Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development describes the apprenticeship model. Learning occurs between what a child can do independently and with skilled guidance. Jerome Bruner's work on enactive representation explains why the child who builds the root cellar understands the physics more deeply when they later encounter it. Project-based learning and makerspaces are the school system's attempts to incorporate this. They are valuable, but structurally limited. A visit once a week does not produce the same encoding as daily participation in real work with real consequence on a property. The Amish household is a continuous, full-immersion, procedural learning environment. The difference in outcome reflects the difference in intensity and authenticity. The Amish child begins participating by doing the smallest part of the work. The 4-year-old carries 1 stone to the pile. The 5-year-old stirs the fermentation crock. The 6-year-old fills the seed holes in the garden. The participation is real, not simulated. The stone contributes to the wall. The fermentation is checked by the stirring. The seed hole receives a seed. The work is not designed for the child. The child is incorporated into the work. The distinction is essential. Designed work for children produces children who understand designed experiences. Incorporation into real work produces children who understand how real work works. The Amish child takes increasing responsibility as their capability grows. The 12-year-old who builds the root cellar has been carrying stone since he was 4. He has been mixing mortar since he was 8. He has been laying stone under supervision since he was 10. The step to full independent construction at 12 is a step, not a leap. It is the next increment in a progression. Each increment was within his capability at the time he took it. Each increment was real work, not practice work. And each increment was supervised by someone who already knew how to do it and who could correct errors in real time. This is the apprenticeship model of education, the oldest and most effective model of practical knowledge transmission that human culture has developed. The apprenticeship model is not quaint or primitive. It is the most neurologically efficient method of encoding practical knowledge in a human brain because it uses the full sensory apparatus: visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, proprioceptive, in the direct performance of the task. The first practice is presence. Children learn what they are present for, bringing the child where the work is. The child who sits on the kitchen counter while the parent checks the fermentation and who receives an honest answer is learning. The child who is in another room with a screen is not. The second practice is narration. When you do the work, say what you are doing and why. Not in a classroom voice, in a conversation voice. This fermentation crock smells a little flat today. I am going to taste it. Yes, it needs a few more days. The salt concentration in this batch was a little low. I will use a bit more next time. The child is receiving the knowledge of fermentation diagnosis in the most accessible form. It is a conversation that happens to contain knowledge. The child's brain encodes it, because conversation is the primary knowledge transmission format that human brains evolved to receive. The third practice is incremental responsibility. Give the child the smallest piece of the real task that they can do successfully. Then the next. The progression is an ongoing assessment of what the child can do. The parent knows when the child is ready without being told. The 12-year-old began building root cellars because his father observed that he had the strength, the attention, and the judgment to build one correctly. The fourth practice is letting the child experience consequences. The oversalted fermentation produces harsh sauerkraut that the family eats while noting the mistake. The garden bed the child planted too densely produces crowded seedlings. These consequences are real and educational, in a way simulations can never be. The child who oversalts once knows physically, in the body and memory, what it tastes like. That knowledge does not require another lesson. The fifth practice is the family book. When the child masters a new skill, the observation goes in the book as a contribution to knowledge. The 12-year-old who notices the root cellar stays warmer in one corner learns that observation and writing things down have real value. The family book becomes the child's first scientific notebook because they see that what they record is taken seriously and used by the family. Regarding the school question, this practical education is not opposed to academic schooling. It is complementary. The combination produces people who can read, write, and calculate, and also build, grow, and maintain. It is simpler than a separate program. Practical education happens as a natural consequence of the household, doing what it is doing with the children present. The household that implements the systems described in this series and brings its children along is automatically providing the practical educational component, not through formal instruction. through presence and narration and incremental responsibility and honest consequence. The child who ferments alongside the parent does not need a fermentation curriculum. The child who builds alongside the parent does not need a construction curriculum. The child who gardens alongside the parent does not need an agronomy curriculum. They need to be there and be incorporated. They need to be given the next increment of real responsibility as their capability develops. That is the education. That is what the 12-year-old in Holmes County received, not instead of school, alongside it. While his father was doing the work of the property, he was there, carrying stone at 4, mixing mortar at 8, laying stone at 10, building at 12, learning the whole time without a single lesson that was labeled as learning. Now let me give you the specific economic calculation that the Amish practical education produces over a generation. The educational return is not just the $1.3 million in the first generation. It is the amplification of that return. Each generation arrives at adulthood, already knowing what took the previous generation years of adult learning to discover. The first-generation practitioner who implements this system as an adult spent time learning each system before it produced returns. The masonry heater required research. The fermentation required experimentation and several failed batches. The beehives required reading and community mentorship. Each system had an establishment cost in knowledge acquisition time. Reasonable estimate of the knowledge acquisition cost is approximately 200 to 400 hours across all systems. At an average value of $35 per hour, the cost is $7,000 to $14,000 in time value, not paid in money, paid in time that could have been applied to other productive activities. The second-generation practitioner who grew up in the household arrives at adulthood already knowing fermentation and basic beekeeping. They already know how to build a root cellar, soil biology principles, and harvest timing. They do not pay the knowledge acquisition cost. They inherit the knowledge fully developed and immediately applicable. The 200 to 400 hours of learning are not paid again. The time value is inherited rather than spent. Significantly, the second generation is more productive from year 1 because they start without the learning curve. The systems produce at full capacity from the beginning, rather than after 2 to 3 years of establishment learning. The additional production in those first 3 years represents a real economic gain that compounds across their lifetime. By the third generation, the gain is larger still. By the time a knowledge system has been running for 300 years, the practical knowledge is the accumulated refinement. It is available to each new practitioner without any of the learning cost that those previous generations paid. That is the deepest economic return in this series. Not the $1.3 million calculation for a single generation. The compounding knowledge inheritance that makes each subsequent generation more capable, more efficient, and more productive than the previous one from the first day. The Amish community's practical competence after 300 years of this compounding is the result. The 12-year-old who can build a root cellar is not exceptional. He is the normal product of a system that has been producing exceptional results through ordinary daily practice for 12 generations. The first generation starts the book. The second generation reads the book and adds to it. The third generation reads 2 generations and adds a third. By the time the book is in its 12th generation, it contains the accumulated specific knowledge of 12 lifetimes of careful observation on one piece of land. The 12th generation practitioner who reads that book before making a management decision on that land is making that decision with access to information that no extension service, no university research station, and no consulting agronomist could provide. Because the information is not general. It is specific. Specific to that land, specific to that climate, specific to the biological systems that have been developing on that land through 12 generations. The 12-year-old in Holmes County who can build a root cellar is not exceptional. He is the normal product of a knowledge transmission system. The knowledge is in his body because his ancestors' knowledge is in the family book, and his father's knowledge is in the family book, and now his knowledge is going in the family book. That is the education. That is the return. Now let me address the most significant structural barrier to implementing this educational model in a contemporary household. The screen. The average American child between ages 8 and 12 spends approximately 5 to 7 hours per day on screens. Smartphones, tablets, gaming consoles. The research on displacement, what activities are not happening because screen time is happening, is in some ways more concerning than the research on screen time itself. When a child is on a screen, they are not present for the work. They are not encoding the procedural knowledge that presence enables. It is 5 to 7 hours per day of not being in the kitchen, not being in the garden, not being in the wood shop, not watching the work being done. The Amish educational model does not depend on limiting screen time because the Amish do not have the screens to limit. Their children are present for the work because there is nothing competing with that presence. For the non-Amish household, the displacement problem is real and must be addressed deliberately rather than assumed away. The practical solution is not eliminating screens. It is structuring the household's daily routine so that the work happens in ways that include the children, and so that the children's presence for the work is protected rather than optional. The fermentation check is not something done after the children sleep. It is something the parent does when the children can be present. The garden watering is not a task done quickly while children are distracted. It is a 10-minute activity that the children accompany. The bread baking, the cheese making, the honey extraction, the soil amendment. These are the activities that happen with the children rather than around them. This requires deliberate scheduling, not elaborate scheduling. The decision to do the work when children can be present rather than when it is most convenient produces the presence that produces learning. It does not require a homeschool curriculum or a parenting expert's endorsement. It requires the decision to do the work where the children are. The family that implements these systems is creating the educational environment of the Amish model. If the children are present when the systems are operated, the fermentation is educational when the child is there and sees it checked and hears the narration of what is being observed. The beehive inspection is educational when the child is watching from a safe distance and asking questions. It is not educational when the parent is alone. The investment required is not financial or structural. It is the decision to include the children in the work as a default rather than an exception. That decision produces the 12-year-old who can build a root cellar. Because they were there, carrying stone at 4, mixing mortar at 8, laying stone at 10, building at 12. Every step was real. Every step was alongside someone who already knew how. Bring your children where the work is. Narrate what you are doing. Give them the next increment of real responsibility. Record observations in the family book. The knowledge will transmit. It has always transmitted this way. It only stops when the doing stops and when children are no longer present. In Holmes County, the doing does not stop. The children are always present. The knowledge keeps transmitting. The 12-year-old keeps building root cellars because the 6-year-old who watched his father build one became the 12-year-old who built one himself. The family book says first frost, 2018, 11 days after average. The root cellar is still at 38 degrees, and the knowledge keeps transmitting. Drop in the comments the age of your youngest child and what they have already participated in from the systems described in this series. The 4-year-old who stirred the crock, the 7-year-old who helped inoculate mushroom logs, the 10-year-old who checked the beehive alongside you, the 14-year-old who troubleshot the solar water heater. Those comments will tell every person reading them what is possible at every age. That map of possibility is what comes next. The specific skills that can be taught and how they double the value of the system. Start there. Start with the work being done while the child is present. That is the education. Everything else follows from it.